class. Today we are going to start with the next topic of class 9, that is the tissue. I hope student you all must have done previously in class 9 the previous chapter, that is the cell, the fundamental unit of life. Now today in this particular class what we are going to understand, we are going to understand that how the different type of cells they combine together to form tissue, and what are the different type of tissue, the structure of tissue and the function of the different tissue. So student, first of all we are going to start with the first type of tissue, that is plant tissue. So before we start with both the type of tissue, that is plant tissue and animal tissue, we all should be aware about the difference. What is the basic difference between plant and animal tissue? Now, as we know about the plants, they are being located at one place, they do not move, they are stationary. So, the majority of the cells which are present in the plant tissue, they are dead. So, because these particular tissue, they provide mechanical strength, they provide, we can say, rigidity, protection, etc. Whereas in case of animal tissue, majority of the cells are living. Because animal tissue, they are basically responsible for movement, for transmission of information, for transportation, as well as for protection. So today, first of all, we are going to deal with plant tissue. So I had already told you that what is the tissue? Tissue is the group of cells performing the same function. Now the student, first thing is that the group of cells, they are going to perform the same function, but the cells, they might be structurally similar, but in case of few tissue, they might not be structurally similar. Now the basic classification of plant tissue is that there are two types of plant tissue, meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. In case of meristematic tissue, they comprise of actively dividing cells which are basically responsible for the production of cell. Basically they are responsible for elongation, increase in diameter. On that particular basis, we are having three types of meristem: apical meristem, lateral meristem and intercalary meristem. Apical meristem, they are found at the tip of the stem and root, and basically they are responsible for the elongation of plant part. It might be root, it might be stem. The second type of meristem, that is lateral meristem, they are found along the sides of the stem and root, and the basic function is increase in the width or diameter of stem and root. The third kind of meristem, that is intercalary meristem, it is found at the base of the young leaves and internode, and the basic function of this is it is responsible for lengthening, further lengthening. For example, in the elongation of the twig, elongation of the branches. So we can say in a way that intercalary meristem, it actually helps apical meristem. Apical meristem is the main meristem which actually help in the elongation of the plant part, but intercalary meristem, it actually responsible for the elongation in the branches, in the twig of the leaves. Apart from that, we can also say, since the meristematic tissue, they are continuously dividing, they are having a prominent nuclei, they are having a dense cytoplasm, but vacuoles are absent. Can you find out the reason why the vacuoles are absent? I said vacuoles are absent, they are having a dense cytoplasm and they are having prominent nuclei. In these particular characteristic only, we are having the answer to this question, that why vacuole are absent. So student, we have done the first type of plant tissue, that is meristematic tissue. Now the second type of the tissue is permanent tissue. Now children, in case of permanent tissue, when meristematic tissue, they lose their ability to divide, they actually get converted into permanent tissue. The name of this particular phenomena or process is differentiation. The conversion of meristematic tissue into permanent tissue, the name of the process is differentiation. In case of permanent tissue, again there are of two types: simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. Now again we need to classify further simple and complex permanent tissue. Now the first type of simple permanent tissue, they consist of only one kind of cell. The first is the dermal or the surface tissue, the tissue which are present on the surface of the plant. Basically in NCERT, in CBSE, we are just going to deal with the epidermis. Epidermis, as we are having the epithelial tissue in case of human being, in the same way in case of plants we are having epidermis. Now what would be present in epidermis? In the epidermis we would be having stomata, and we all must have done it in the junior classes, that what is the function of the stomata? That would be the exchange of gases, that is respiration, photosynthesis, transpiration. But we can also say it is present in the outermost layer of the primary plant body. It covers the leaves, floral part, fruit, seeds, etc. In some cases it might be covered with cuticle, especially in case of desert plant. What might be the reason? Because the cuticle, it prevents the loss of water. And then we are having many kind of unspecialized cell as well. For example, parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma, etc. So we can just say that in case of dermal or in case of the surface of the plant, we are having epidermis. The basic function of epidermis is protection. In case of desert plant, cuticle is present on the epidermis to prevent the loss of water. Apart from that, stomata are also present on epidermis, and the stomata is basically responsible for the exchange of gases, for transpiration, etc. As you can look at the diagram, the stomata, it is being guarded by the guard cell. The opening and closing of stomata, it is being regulated by the guard cell. Now this is the diagram of the cuticle, that how does cuticle prevent the loss of water in case of desert plant. Otherwise it would be very difficult for any plant to survive in that particular region. So it is a kind of a waxy material. Now the first we have done in this particular case, the dermal tissue, that is we have just explained and understood epidermis. The second, now we are going to talk about the ground tissue. In this particular thing, we are having three types: parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. Now, in case of parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma, we are going to actually compare them on the basis of their function, on the basis of their structure and on the basis of their location. Now, the parenchyma, this particular tissue, it is located throughout the plant body. And the basic function of parenchyma is, we can say, storage of food, photosynthesis, etc. And it is, the cells are relatively unspecialized, cell wall is thin. That is the basic, we can say, structure of parenchyma. But though it's not given there in the book as well, but we are having two types of parenchyma, that is erenchyma and chlorenchyma. When the parenchyma contains chlorophyll, the one which you have did in your junior classes, chlorophyll, it is an essential requirement for the process of photosynthesis. So when the parenchyma contains chlorophyll, we call it as chlorenchyma. This particular parenchyma is responsible for the process of photosynthesis. In case of aquatic plants, the parenchyma, it contains air spaces, and we call that particular parenchyma as erenchyma. And the function of erenchyma, that it helps the aquatic plant to float. So we are having two types of parenchyma, or we can say that there are specialized parenchyma on the basis where they are present. In case of aquatic plant, they need to float. So in that particular case, the parenchyma contain air spaces. In case of plant, most of the plants, they do photosynthesis, but the parenchyma containing chlorophyll, that is known as chlorenchyma. The second, this is the diagram of the parenchyma cells. As we can look into the diagram, they are relatively unspecialized cell. The cell wall is thin, intercellular space is practically absent, or we can say very less. Now this is the diagram of that specialized parenchyma tissue only, which is found in the green parts of the shoot, and it actually basically responsible to perform photosynthesis. Now, the second type of ground tissue is collenchyma. As the term indicates, collenchyma, the cells are elongated and they are having unevenly thickened cell wall. Cell wall is irregularly thickened at corner. If we compare it with parenchyma cell wall, in that particular case cell wall is thin. But in this particular case cell wall is irregularly thickened. Now the cells of collenchyma are also living and the function is to support, to give flexibility, to provide elasticity. That is the function of collenchyma. Now the third type of, this is again the diagram of collenchyma. As you can look into the diagram, so these are elongated cells and the cell wall is irregularly thickened. The third type of tissue is sclerenchyma tissue. Now, as if you were to compare them with parenchyma and collenchyma, the difference is that these particular cells are non-living. This is the most important point which you shall remember, that these cells are non-living, whereas parenchyma and collenchyma, they were living cells. And the cell wall is thick due to the deposition of one particular chemical that is known as lignin. We have written just, they have thick lignified secondary wall. That means the cell wall had become thick due to the deposition of lignin. The function is it provides strength and support to the plant, and there are different type of cells present in it. We are having stone cells, we are having fibers, etc. Now this is the diagram of sclerenchyma tissue. So you can see stone and sclerite also present in it. So first of all we have in the now the next is complex permanent tissue. Now the complex permanent tissue, why do we call them as complex? Because in this particular case we are having more than one type of cell which combine together to form a particular tissue. In the previous section, whether we are talking about meristematic tissue or we were talking about simple permanent tissue, we were having same type of cells which were combining together to form a tissue, and the structure was same. If I was talking about parenchyma, so we were having relatively unspecialized cell. It was nothing that we can give a specific name to the cell. But in case of complex permanent tissue, we are having different type of cells. And these particular cells, basically they are responsible for the transportation of water, which we call as ascent of sap, which we are going to study in detail in class 10. Transport of food, which we call as translocation. Again, we are going to study about it in detail in class 10. Now, they contain different kind of cells and basically they are located in the veins in leaves. They are of two types, xylem and phloem. Now, in case of xylem, we are having basically four type of cell: xylem vessel, xylem fiber, trachea and parenchyma. Children, among these four type of cell, that is vessel, trachea, basically they are responsible for the transportation of water. Xylem parenchyma main function is storage of food, and then we are having xylem fiber. Basically it is responsible for mechanical strength. One more thing which you should take into consideration is that xylem vessel, fiber as well as xylem vessel, trachea and fiber, they are dead cell, whereas xylem parenchyma is the only cell which is living. So two types of xylem are there, primary xylem and secondary xylem. It is just an information, but the basic thing, the xylem, four type of cell, three cells are dead except xylem parenchyma, and basically responsible for the transportation of water containing dissolved mineral. The term is known as ascent of sap. So here they are just given the example, two kinds of xylem element, that is trachea and vessel element. Now both are elongated, they are dead at maturity, they are lignified, they are having lignified secondary cell wall. Now the second type of complex permanent tissue is phloem. Now this particular tissue, basically it is responsible for the transportation of dissolved substances or for the transportation of the soluble product of photosynthesis. The term is known as translocation. Again, they are of two types, primary and secondary. In case of this particular tissue also, we are having four type of elements: seed tube, companion cell. Seed tube and companion cell, basically they are responsible for the transportation of food. Whereas then we are having parenchyma. The parenchyma tissue, again it is responsible for the storage of food. Then we are having one fiber. The fiber is basically responsible for mechanical strength. In case of this particular tissue, what do we have? In case of this particular tissue, all the three cells are living. That is, companion cell, parenchyma and seed tube are living. The only cell which is dead, that is fiber. So before we start with the animal tissue, let us just summarize the plant tissue. In case of plant tissue, what we did, we just studied that basically the plant tissue can be basically classified into two types, that is meristematic and permanent. Meristematic tissue can be classified into three types, that is apical, intercalary and lateral. All the three types of tissue, meristematic tissue, we can actually classify them on the basis of their location and on the basis of their function. The second type of tissue, that is the permanent tissue, again we have classified them into two types, that is surface and ground. In case of surface tissue, we had basically studied about epidermis. Now in case of ground tissue, again we are having simple permanent and complex permanent. Simple permanent, three types, that is parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma, and we have studied all the three types of tissue on the basis of the type of structure, what kind of cell wall do they have, whether the cells are living or dead, where are they located and what is their function. In case of complex tissue, they are having some different kind of function. But the difference is that in case of complex permanent tissue, they are made up of more than one type of cell. Now in case of animal tissue, basically as we did in the beginning of the chapter, I just told you that the basic difference between the plant and animal tissue is that majority of the cells in plant tissue, they were dead, but in case of animal tissue, majority of the cells are living. So the first type of the different categories of animal tissue are epithelium, connective, muscle and nervous tissue. All the different tissues, they are having different kind of function. Epithelium, it is basically present in the outer covering of different organ. The basic function would be protection. Connective tissue, the basic function is to transport the material between different body parts. It is also responsible to make a connection between bone and muscle, a connection between bone and bone. Muscle, basically we all are understood that the muscle function would be movement and the nervous tissue function would be the transfer of information. Now first of all, we are going to talk about the first kind of tissue, animal tissue, that is epithelium tissue. As the term indicates, this particular tissue, it lines, it covers and it protects other tissue and organ. It is basically the cells are tightly packed, and we are going to name the different type of cell on the basis of what kind of shape do they have and what are the other kind of characteristic and what is their function or where they are located. The first kind of epithelium tissue, that is the squamous epithelium, and the cells are flat just like tiles of floor. That is the basic, we can say, structure of the epithelial tissue, which is known as squamous epithelial tissue. The cells, they are very thin and they are much wider than they are thick. So they do appear just like tiles which are present on the floor. Now this particular epithelium tissue is again of two types, simple and stratified. If the squamous epithelium, just a layer is present, we call it as simple squamous epithelium. The function, and it is being located in the respiratory tract, lining of blood vessel, heart, lymphatic tube, etc. And if it is being arranged in many layers, so to prevent wear and tear, so we call it as stratified squamous epithelium, and it is being present in skin, vagina, esophagus, mouth, etc. Now these are the examples of simple squamous epithelium. You can just say the single layer of cell is present, and in case of basement membrane is present below the single layer of cell. In case of stratified squamous epithelium, the same kind of cells, but they are being arranged in many layers, because in case of skin we need that kind of tissue which can actually protect us from wear and tear. Now the second kind of epithelium is cuboidal epithelium. Now the cells, they are cube type of cell, and the basic function of cuboidal epithelium is secretion, absorption and mechanical support as well. That is the basic function. Secretion, absorption, yeah, it does that also, but the basic function is mechanical support. Now what is the location of cuboidal epithelium? The cells are cube-like as the term indicates. The location is kidney tubules, ducts of the glands and the surface of the ovary. Mechanical strength, mechanical support is the basic function. Then the next and the last category of epithelium is columnar epithelium. Now these cells are elongated cells. They are much longer than they are wide. That is the structure of columnar epithelium. Then we are having simple columnar epithelium, single layer of cells that line the digestive tract, gallbladder, excretory duct of some gland. Then we are having pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Basically we can say that cilia are present. Cilia are the projections, or we can say hair-like structure, which actually help to move the mucus in the forward direction. And ciliated columnar epithelium, basically it is being present in the respiratory tract. Now the columnar epithelium, basically it is present in the small intestine, and we all are aware what is the basic function of small intestine? Absorption. So it is very easy to learn the function of columnar epithelium also. Columnar epithelium, location small intestine, function would be absorption. And ciliated columnar epithelium, because cilia is present in the respiratory tract, so location would be there only. Apart from that, it is also present in some part of the uterus, and this mucus or the cilia, it propels the mucus or reproductive cells by ciliary action. So these are the various diagram of simple columnar epithelium. Now this was about epithelium tissue. The next category of animal tissue is connective tissue. Now the connective tissue, they are characterized by the cells which are widely separated from each other in a matrix that is produced by the cell. These particular tissue, they protect, they support, they also help in the transportation of the material. Now the cell matrix, it is composed of two regions, that is ground, and it might be liquid, gel, gum or solid, and the fibers. The fibers might be non-elastic, that is white or collagen, or it might be elastic, that is yellow fiber. Now the types of connective tissue. Now there are different types of connective tissue. Loose, that is areolar connective tissue. Then we are having dense connective tissue. We are having adipose, cartilage, bone, blood, etc. Now we are again in this type of connective tissue on the basis of the nature of the matrix, where are they located, what is their function, they have been classified into so many types. So first of all, we are going to talk about areolar connective tissue. It is a loose connective tissue. The matrix is gel-like ground with both elastic and non-elastic fiber running through the ground in many directions. So these are the diagram also of this particular areolar connective tissue. Basically, it helps in repair also. It fills the space present between the internal organ. Now this is the dense regular connective tissue. The nuclei and fibers, they are arranged in parallel rows. And in this mostly we are going to talk about tendon and ligament, that what is the function of the tendon, what is the function of the ligament. The one type of connective tissue, it connects bone to the bone. The second type of connective tissue, it connects muscle to the bone. And both the kind of tissue, they bear considerable strength, but one is more elastic and the second one is less elastic. Now we are having adipose tissue. The basic function, it is fat. It basically stores adipose or fat. It contains a large vacuole in the living cell which contain lipid. Cell nucleus and cytoplasm, they are pushed out to one, we can say at one area of the cell membrane or on one side of the cell membrane. The basic function of the adipose tissue is the storage of fat. So we can say the basic function would be the, so what would be the basic function of adipose tissue? It just, we can say insulation. Insulation would be the basic function of the adipose tissue. Now the next is cartilage tissue. The ground or the matrix, it is gum-like. The cells are found in lacunae within the matrix. Fibers may be elastic or non-elastic, or a form of a non-elastic called reticular. We are having two types of cartilage again, hyaline cartilage and elastic cartilage. And hyaline cartilage, the examples are, they are present on the ends of the bone, and the elastic cartilage, for example, if you are going to talk about pinna of the ear. So that is the example of elastic cartilage. Non-elastic cartilage, for example, the cartilage which is present in the nose. Now these are the diagrams of hyaline cartilage and bone. The bone is the next kind of connective tissue, and the matrix, it is composed of calcium and phosphorus. It do have blood supply and the nerves which run throughout the canal system. Bone is inflexible, and the basic, we can say it support the body. It is present throughout the body. Now we are having the next connective tissue, that is blood. In case of blood, we are having a liquid matrix which is known as plasma, which consists of 90% water and 10% we are having protein, hormone, electrolyte, etc. There are three types of cells which are present in the blood, that is red blood cell or erythrocytes, and we all are aware. In case of RBC, we are having hemoglobin. And the function of hemoglobin, that it combines with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin, which is basically responsible for the transportation of oxygen. So the function of RBC is transportation of oxygen. The second kind of, we can say blood cell, they are leukocyte, or we can also call them as WBC. And the basic function, we all are aware that basically they are responsible to fight against various disease. If the WBC count is elevated, that means we are suffering from some kind of infection. Platelets, we all are aware, basically it is responsible for clotting of the blood. So these are the diagrams of the blood, erythrocyte, leukocyte. Now, the third kind of animal tissue which we are going to talk about, that is the muscle tissue. These are the tissue with cells having fibers specialized for contraction. We are having three types of muscles. Skeletal muscle, we also call them as striated muscle. Why do we call them as striated muscle? Because we are having alternate light and dark bands. We also call them as voluntary muscle. Why do we call them as voluntary muscle? Because basically it is responsible for the voluntary action. It is basically responsible for the voluntary movement of the body. Now it is having elongated cell which we call as fiber. The muscle is multinucleated, and they had just written light meat, dark meat, that is just they are talking about alternate light and dark band. Then the second kind of muscle, that is the smooth muscle. It is basically found inside the internal organ. We are calling them as smooth muscle because alternate light and dark bands are absent. We can also call them as unstriated muscle. Why do we call them as involuntary muscle? Because the movement of these particular muscle are not under our control. They will move, whatever might happen. So basically they are present, for example, peristaltic movement inside the alimentary canal. Whatever movement takes place inside the internal organ, all these movements, they are being controlled by these particular muscle. Now the last type of muscle is cardiac muscle. In case of cardiac muscle, they are basically present in the heart, and they are involuntary, but they do have some kind of bands present in them. So in a way in the structure they might resemble with skeletal muscle also, but in a way in the function they are resembling with smooth muscle also. So the cardiac muscle, they are present inside the heart, and the basic function is rhythmic contraction and relaxation of heart muscle take place throughout the body because of the presence of these cardiac muscle. So these are the diagrams of the skeletal muscle. You can just go through them. Now these are smooth muscle, elongated fibers, cardiac muscle which are present inside the heart. Now the last type of animal tissue, that is the nervous tissue. You might have done it in class 8 as well as I guess in class 6 also. The structural and functional unit of nervous system, that is known as neuron. The basic function of neuron is transfer of information from the environment. Whatever is present in the environment, that is being accepted by the receptors. Receptors send it to the sensory neuron send it to the brain. From the brain, the information is being sent to the effectors via the motor neuron. So the basic structural and functional unit of nervous tissue is neuron. So there they have just told us the different, we can just categorize or we can just compare the different types of, we can say, animal tissue on the basis of the what type of cell are present, where are they located, what is the some special feature of these cells, what kind of matrix is present, what kind of matrix amount is present, and what are their unique feature. So this is a kind of comparison between all the 4 type of animal cell. So this is what we have done in this particular chapter. I hope it must be clear to you. Thank you, class.